had more cement factories come on board. We've had many more people coming on stream in the space around making construction equipment, making inquiries in transport industry. More transporters are coming on board. So we have built a whole construction industry around housing. What is more, we are slowly rolling back land fragmentation. We are slowly influencing land that was meant for agricultural activity. We are now reserving it for agricultural productivity and food security instead of it being subdivided for informal settlement. So it hasn't taken a person, it has taken a whole Kenyan society, because the executive has been in, Alice and myself and the team. People in the legislature have done their part. The people of Kenya are the biggest contributors to this success. Why? Because they put in their taxes. And we are making the change together. And that is why I am very proud to address this audience and to share our experience as a nation, which I believe is what other countries are doing. Maybe they are doing it differently, but we can share in this experience. Finally, you've asked me, what are the challenges? Yes. The challenges have been, the change. Changing a situation is not an easy thing. So we've had political pushback. We still have people, politicians who still think you can make populist, we are going to stop this housing because we are protecting the pay slips of people. Such pedestrian talk. How do you cannot see the 640,000 people working. You don't know what to do with them. I know many ministers here are wondering whether there are still people who are opposing this in Kenya. Yes, they are there, and they are not few. There are many. Many politicians still climb to podium to talk about how they want to stop this. How you want to stop such transformation is mind-boggling, right? We still have courts. We've gone through difficult challenges in courts. People who go to court, they want to stop this. In fact, many of them are asking me, who told you we need houses? Others are saying, why are you taking government land, building houses, and then giving it to individuals? The same people don't mind if the same government land, people invade, they settle, it becomes an informal settlement. They don't mind it. But they mind it if we use it and build affordable housing, make decent use of it. Then you ask yourself, those are the kind of challenges we have to deal with. They look mundane, they don't look very intelligent, but they are there. And we have to confront them every day. Sometimes they come from people who you think should know more, I remember telling one of my friends who was opposed to this housing, and I was asking them, my friend, in your house, you possibly have 3 or 4 toilets. One in your bedroom, one somewhere, another one somewhere. There are people who don't have a toilet. They have to pay to use a toilet. That is the conversation we're having. It is as basic as that. So if you don't see the value of a social house or an affordable house, there are people who desperately need it because because at the very least, they need a toilet of their own. That's how basic it is. And finally, let me say this. It is about dignity, giving people dignity. It is about getting another group of people to own something. Today, in a social house, for as less as $30 a month, you become a homeowner. That would not happen under any other circumstance. It would not happen. If we left this to the private sector, the private sector builds for those who can afford, not those who need. Government must think about the people who need the houses. And that is why policy becomes central to the delivery of housing. Sorry, I've taken long.
No, Mr. President, this is fantastic. Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard from His Excellency. This is bold, transformative, and courageous leadership in practice. Mr. President, thank you for bringing the human face to the affordable housing agenda. It's very important for us to see it's not just about housing, as you've said, but it's about dignity, and it's about the people. Mr. President, we have other leaders in the audience that would like to also bring into this conversation and hear from them. My first question I'd like to pose to Her Excellency Ana Claudia Rosbach, UN Undersecretary General and Executive Director of UN Habitat. Madam Executive Director, when you talk about the future of Africa, and are governments investing enough in secondary cities as the next frontier for affordable housing, or are we still over-concentrating resources in primary urban centers? Madam Secretary.
Thank you so much. First of all, I really would like to appreciate Mr. Excellency President Ruto for your honesty and transparency. Indeed, housing is complex, and without top leadership, as you said, Minister, it's very difficult to accomplish because there are so many factors involved. But President spoke about the hundreds of millions that are coming to urban settings in Africa. And I spoke about the rural-urban, but also the migration among cities. And our data shows that the growth is actually happening in intermediary city. But if we look at metropolitan areas, the pressure is very, very, very high. At the front line, as you all mentioned, and as we are discussing at this forum, is housing. Because we cannot think about people coming to cities and not having housing. As the president said, the markets are limited. Right now in Africa, I would say 10% is the outreach of the market, just because the incomes of the people are this low and the prices of their houses are this low. And somebody needs to fix that. So you putting public land into housing helps to cover the gap. You find the finance, and very well highlighted, the domestic finance, because this money is not out there available, is critical to cover this affordability gap. So the city planning, the role of the local authorities, of the mayors, of the governors is critical, because if we don't line up these actions, the money, the regulations, you mentioned a law, you changed the law that comes from the national level, the programs that comes and the planning that comes from the national level. If we don't line up with what's being done at the local level, if the governors, if the mayors, they don't plan for this growth, then it's going to be sustainable. So you need to build the houses, but you need to be conscious that where you build and how you build make a difference. And here I would like to call attention for the densification of the housing program, because indeed we cannot continue urban sprawl. This is affecting food security, this is affecting our natural resources. So this is also, you mentioned, Mr. President, about a social pact that you did with the society of Kenya, but this needs to be replicated at the local level. Because if you don't agree with the society, how the city is going to grow up and to the side, and for whom, then it's not feasible. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Executive Director, for reinforcing the importance of...
Can you allow me just to backstop what she has said? It is very fundamental that governments at all levels are aligned. I must commend the leadership of Professor Anyang' Nyong'o in the Council of Governors, because it wasn't going to be possible for us to roll out this in a very short time if we didn't have the partnership of our county governments. Today, approvals for houses take the shortest time possible because we have standardized many things, and we have agreed with the county governments that whether it is national government land or county government land, this is land that belongs to the people of Kenya. There are no national government people, there are no county government people, we only have the people of Kenya. And it has been of immense, assistance that we have aligned ourselves, underlined the program with our county governments. And secondly, on the issue of infrastructure, because part of what we put into legislation is that apart from building the houses, water, sewage, roads that make it possible for citizens to access this affordable housing is part of the development of the housing. So that's not just about houses, it's about how those houses are going to be livable. And finally, is densification. She said a very important thing. We started with ground plus 4. We went to ground plus 9. We realized that was not enough. We went to ground plus 24. We are now getting even higher because you cannot continue to have what she called sprawling cities, because land is finite. You can only have so much land. But populations are increasing, you need more land to produce food, and less land for housing. So you need to go vertical. And I think that is what we have learned in the short time we were here. I remember with my team, led by Alice and my good friend Charles, we had to rethink and redesign the whole thing, because we realized that it wasn't tenable for us to do ground plus 4 for especially big cities, because land is finite and it's expensive.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. And now that you're talking about county governments, recently we witnessed the signing of a new partnership agreement between the national government and the Nairobi City County governments. This is not the first time such an arrangement has been pursued. We previously saw a similar model that led to the establishment of the Nairobi Metropolitan Services. This partnership has sparked an important debate. Some argue that such partnerships risk undermining the gains of devolution, while others contend that Nairobi, given its role as the nation's capital, economic hub, and diplomatic center, requires a unique governance approach. Mr. President, what distinguishes this new partnership from the previous arrangements? And most importantly, what tangible outcomes should Kenyans expect to see as a result of this new renewed collaboration?
There's a world of a difference between the partnership under NMS and the partnership we have today with the county government of Nairobi. Under the previous arrangement, it was a transfer of functions. We are not undertaking any transfer of functions. We are working in partnership with the Nairobi City County, because Nairobi City County is also the capital city of the Republic of Kenya. And the law outrightly states that the Nairobi City County needs to have a special arrangement with the national government because Nairobi City County also is the seat of the government of Kenya. And therefore, we've undertaken this agreement, and for the first time, a president in Kenya is going to address the assembly of a county, and I will be doing it today at 2:30 p.m. Because that partnership is important. We've agreed on the parameters that need to be undertaken, on making sure that the city is clean, on making sure that the city is lit, on making sure that the city is motorable. So we have agreed on which is not the subject of this meeting. We have agreed on what we are going to do with the Nairobi City County. And I am very happy and I'm very proud that we have this agreement. It is not about the president, it's not about the governor, it's about the people of this city, and it's about the capital city of the Republic of Kenya. So that is the agreement we have signed. It is not undermining devolution. In fact, we will be empowering the city of Nairobi to do more and to get it better for the residents and for the Republic of Kenya. Because if Nairobi, many people, these great people who have come here, if they go back home, they will tell you, we went to Kenya. But actually they came to Nairobi. So Nairobi must present the right face of Kenya. So that is what we are trying to achieve.
Thank you, Your Excellency. So yeah, we've heard from His Excellency on bold leadership, courageous leadership to get this big, audacious initiative going. But Mr. President, we also need money to ensure that we deliver at scale. So to respond to this question, I'd like to speak to Mr. Abbas Jar, Practice Manager, Urban Development and Disaster Risk Management, Eastern and Southern Africa at the World Bank. Mr. Jar, policy sets direction, but financing determines whether we arrive. Financing remains critical on both the demand and supply sides. Despite over $400 trillion in global capital, African cities remain underfinanced due to perceived risk, weak project pipelines, and limited creditworthiness. Mortgage penetration remains below 10% in most African countries, largely due to income informality. What is preventing private capital, particularly African capital, from flowing into housing and urban infrastructure? And what would a fully functional housing finance ecosystem look like?
Thank you, Vivian. I think one of the advantages of coming towards the end is that everything that needs to be said has already been said. So I can just pick on the points previous speakers made. I want to begin by really commending His Excellency President Ruto's leadership on housing. And what I really appreciate at a personal level is the way you link housing to jobs and dignity. I think one thing, the Cabinet Secretary made a very good point, which is that cities are not just where jobs are created, it's how jobs are created. And that is something that is really, really important. If you think about cities and towns, they are places where people connect with other people across space and time to create value. And once you start thinking of a city or a town like that, everything else falls in place. And housing is one of the parts of that puzzle. So let me just start with a couple of numbers that are so sobering that it makes you pause. So in the 3 days that we have the Africa Urban Forum, 120,000 Africans will have moved from rural areas to cities. If we don't get this housing part right, 12 million Africans will live in informal settlements in precisely the substandard existence that the President mentioned, with the lack of dignity, with the lack of basic services. So we have to get this right. We cannot afford to not get it right. To come to your question, Vivian, what will it take? I think it will take three things. And the President has already mentioned a few of those. First, fix the land, fix the street, fix the sewage and the water before you put the housing in. That is super critical. And have examples in Kenya, Dandora, we have examples in Angola, we have examples in Cote d'Ivoire of sites and services, which precisely does this. You put in the trunk infrastructure before the housing is built, so that you ensure that the private sector can come in a meaningful way. That's number one. But second is that often we think of the housing finance market as one market. It's actually 5 markets. If you think about it, when you start from the bottom, say the bottom 20%, they cannot afford a mortgage. They'll never be able to afford a mortgage. Then you have to think about things like targeted subsidies, sites and services, things like that. When you look at the middle of the market, there are things like, for example, 70% of housing in Africa is self-financed and incrementally. So people don't build a house at one go, they'll build step by step. So you need to match the finance with that and with their ability to pay. And then at the top of the market, you have the mortgages. And then there are things that you can do to improve the functioning of that market. But always remember that the housing finance market is actually several markets. And you need instruments for each of those markets. And the third point that I would say to get private capital in is something that Anna Claudia also mentioned, is that you need to link transport corridors, density, flood zones. You need to demarcate which parts of the towns and the cities are no-build zones so that the poor don't settle in these hazardous places. And by the way, now high-resolution satellite imagery gives us the ability to pinpoint precisely which are the areas that are going to flood, which should not be built up. I live in Nairobi. I love the city. But we saw flooding last month due to the heavy rains. So there are parts of cities and towns that should not ever be built up. And you can use technology now to do that very cost effective. So I would say these are the 3 things we need to do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Abbas. Your Excellency, I would like to come to you on the same topic. So recently, we saw the launch of the National Infrastructure Fund, alongside a number of innovative financing mechanisms, such as the securitization of the fuel levy to support road infrastructure, and the sports levy financing flagship projects like Talanta Stadiums and the many stadiums that you're building across the country. Does this signal a deliberate shift towards more innovative financing models, moving beyond traditional reliance on debt and taxation, both of which have clear limits, we know that? And secondly, with the National Infrastructure Fund now in place, should Kenyans expect to see accelerated investment